You've created your rosette, and you are ready to install the rosette into your soundboard. First, we locate the center of the sound hole and fix the soundboard to a plywood base. Then we measure and trace out the outline of the rosette. The rosette channel is cleared with a Dremel tool on a circle cutting jig, making the first cuts in the middle of the rosette outline, and from there working out towards the pencil lines. Once the rosette fits snug, it can be sanded back to the level of the soundboard and glued in place. Okay, now that we understand the basic steps, let's get started. Measure out and mark the center of the sound hole on the soundboard. I do this by tracing the outline of the form on the soundboard and measuring from the top of the outline down the glue joint of the book-matched pair. In this case, it is 149 millimeters. And now we want to drill a 3/16 inch hole in this case, or whatever the size of your pin is for your circle cutting jig. You want to cut a hole that size. We're going to drill that hole through the soundboard and through this plywood board. I'm going to hang it over the edge of my workbench just a little bit because obviously I don't want to drill into my workbench. So let's do that. Okay, now we want to determine the diameter of the inside of our rosette, so we can mark that out on the soundboard. And it's looking to me like right around 110 millimeters. Measure out from the center pinhole the location for your rosette and mark at several different radial points. Now we can place the rosette right over our markings, and we can lightly trace that out. So that our soundboard doesn't spin freely when we're running the Dremel tool on the circle cutting jig, I'm just going to place 2 strips of this low-tack blue painter's tape down here at the lower bout, so it's also not in our way. Let's set the radius for our circle cutting jig. So what I want to do is set the radius to somewhere in the middle of our outline. Nothing precise right now, we just want to be somewhere right in the middle of that. So I'll loosen that up what we're going to do is we're going to start in the middle and then work our way through follow-up passes, work our way to the outer edges. Set the depth of cut to about 1/3 of the width of your bit. For example, I am using a 3/32 of an inch spiral down cut bit. So I will set the depth to about 1/32 of an inch. Make the first pass starting and ending in the area where the fretboard tongue will lie, so as to cover up any mishaps that may occur from starting and stopping the bit. So let's do a second pass. Increase the depth by a little bit. After the first pass, again increase the depth by about 1/3 the width of the bit and make a second pass. Keep making passes like this until you reach an appropriate depth. An appropriate depth is one that allows you to seat the rosette firmly, but with it sticking up just a little bit proud of the soundboard surface. Yeah, that looks good. Our rosette will definitely sit proud of that. Alright, so now we're going to start working our way either out towards this edge or out towards this edge. I'll start working my way towards the inside edge first. So I'm just going to loosen that, and I'm going to pull this into that edge just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to stop there because we're close to our line, and I'm going to switch to going to the opposite side. If you are having trouble fitting the rosette piece, try carefully breaking or snapping the rosette at one point. This makes the piece more flexible as it is no longer a closed loop. The rosette channel is still too small. Let's make another pass. Okay, so we've cleaned up the channel, and now we can drop this in. Be mindful when you put this in, because you might not be able to get it back out again, where you want it to line up. So if you look down here, I have this mating edge, this joint between these two pieces. I want that to line up with my center line. The whole thing will look just right that way. And then I can pop it in. Of course, you can see up here that gap there, because I broke it in that spot so that it is a little more flexible and it can fit more easily. And you can also see the whole thing is quite a bit proud of the soundboard surface. That's good. That's how we want it. That way we are now going to sand all that back, and it'll be flush with the surface. Just a point about design here. Another thing you can always do is add strips like these, which you find at luthier suppliers. Usually have these, but you can always route out your channel a little bit bigger and add these wood strips in, just to give an extra little something to it. Okay, now we're ready to sand this flush. I'm going to use my drum sander again, and again, it's a nice day, so I'm going to take this thing outside, keep the dust down in the shop. So, okay, so you may have noticed that we haven't actually glued this in yet. That's on purpose. I first like to sand it down, because it should be seated firmly in place right now. I like to sand it down first, just seated in place before I put the glue in. That way I don't have piles of glue that I have to sand through up against the sides of a very tall rosette. So now we have it down, so there's just a little bit of a lip there. That's a good time to fill in, fill in the gaps. So if you did a perfect job and it fits just perfectly, then that's great. You don't need to do this. Usually there's little tiny gaps. I can see little gaps right around here and over here. So what I'm going to do is fill that with ebony dust. So first I just have a piece of ebony that I had lying around the shop. I'm going to use this 220 grit paper and just create myself a little pile of dust. Okay, that's probably good. This into our soundboard. Now you don't want to press the ebony dust all over the soundboard. You can kind of work it into the spruce, and you don't want that. here it doesn't matter, we're cutting out this hole anyway. So I'm going to try and keep it on the ring, but I want to very gently, I'm not pressing it into the gaps. You don't want to do that because then when you wick the super glue down into it, if you've packed and pressed the ebony dust into place, then the super glue doesn't really have any spaces to percolate down into, and so then the fill doesn't really work. Okay, we'll wait a second to spray the accelerator, just so that it doesn't all bubble up like super glue often does if you spray the accelerator too soon. An important note, you don't need to spray the accelerator. You could just wait. But if you're impatient like me, you spray the accelerator. Okay, now that we've actually glued this in place, we can do the final sanding down to flush with the rest of the soundboard, and we can finally see what this is going to look like. Well, if you did a good job, at this point you should have something that looks like this. We're now flush with the rest of the soundboard, and we're ready to move on to the next step.